The pen felt heavier than it should have. It was just a ballpoint, the cheap kind you grab from a bank counter. But signing my name at the bottom of those divorce papers took everything I had left. My husband stood across the kitchen island with his arms folded, tapping his foot like I was wasting his time. Next to him, a woman I'd never met until 3 months ago was rubbing her belly and smiling at me like she'd already won. "Hurry up, Marin. I've got dinner reservations." That's what he said to me. 12 years of marriage, and Derek couldn't even wait for the ink to dry before thinking about his next meal with her. "There," I said, setting the pen down. "It's done." My mother-in-law, Judith, snatched the papers off the counter and inspected my signature like she was checking for forgery. "Good. Now pack whatever's yours and leave. And don't take anything that belongs to this family." I didn't flinch. I'd stopped flinching around Judith years ago. She turned to the woman beside Derek and cupped her face with both hands. "Tessa, sweetheart, you must be exhausted. Let me fix you something to eat. You're carrying my grandson. You need to keep your strength up." Tessa leaned into Judith's touch like a kitten. "Thank you, Judith. You're already a better mother to me than my own ever was." I almost laughed. Almost. My daughter was sitting on the staircase watching all of this through the banister rails. 8 years old, quiet as a shadow, clutching a stuffed rabbit she'd had since she was 2. I walked over and knelt down so we were eye to eye. "The one we packed together, remember?" She nodded. No tears. She'd learned not to cry in this house. "Where do you think you're going with her?" Derek called out. "I have full custody. You agreed to it." Page 7, paragraph 4. "You signed it yourself 20 minutes ago." He opened his mouth, then closed it. He hadn't read the papers. Of course he hadn't. His lawyer had drafted them in a rush because Derek wanted this done fast. Before Tessa's belly got any bigger, before anyone at his office started asking questions. "Whatever. She's your problem now," he said, turning back to Tessa. Noah came downstairs with her purple backpack. I took her hand and picked up the single suitcase I'd left by the front door. One suitcase. 12 years of my life and everything I needed fit in one rolling bag. As I reached for the door handle, Judith fired her parting shot. "Don't come crawling back when you can't afford groceries. A woman with no career, no income, no connections, what exactly is your plan?" Marin, I didn't turn around. I just said, "Goodbye, Judith," and I walked out. The Texas heat hit us the second we stepped outside. It was late June in Dallas, and even at 7 in the evening, the air was thick enough to chew. I loaded our suitcase into the trunk of the used Honda I'd bought with cash 2 months ago, a purchase Derek never noticed because Derek never noticed anything about me. "Mommy, where are we going?" "New York. The one with the buildings." "The one with the buildings." I pulled out of the driveway and didn't look at the rearview mirror, not once. We didn't go to the airport that night. I'd planned this too carefully to rush. We drove to a hotel near DFW, one I'd booked under my maiden name 3 weeks earlier with a prepaid card. Noah fell asleep the moment her head touched the pillow. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened my laptop. There were 11 new emails from a woman named Catherine Hale, and every single one of them was marked urgent. I need to back up. I need to explain who Catherine is and why those emails mattered more than anything Derek ever said to me. Before I married Derek, I was a forensic accountant. Not just any forensic accountant. I was the person companies hired when they suspected someone was stealing from them and needed proof that would hold up in federal court. I was good. I was very, very good. By 26, I'd helped uncover 3 major fraud schemes that made national news, though my name never appeared in any of the coverage. That's how forensic accounting works. You're the ghost behind the headline. Then I met Derek at a friend's wedding, and he was charming in the way that only men who are hiding something can be charming. Within a year, we were married, and he asked me to quit. "I make enough for both of us," he said. "I want you home. I want a real family." So I quit. Or rather, I appeared to quit. My former boss, Catherine Hale, was building a private consulting firm specializing in corporate fraud investigations. She'd watched me work for 4 years and refused to let me disappear. "You're not wasting that brain," she told me over coffee 2 weeks after my wedding. "Work from home. Set your own hours. No one needs to know." And so for 12 years, while Derek thought I was folding laundry and watching daytime television, I was tracing money through shell corporations, analyzing transaction patterns for Fortune 500 companies, and building fraud cases that put people in prison. My compensation went into a brokerage account in my maiden name that Derek had no idea existed. By the time he shoved those divorce papers across the kitchen island, I had more money saved than he'd earned in the last 5 years combined. The woman Judith called a woman with no career, no income, no connections, was sitting on nearly $900,000 in liquid assets and had a job offer waiting for her in Manhattan. I wasn't running away. I was finally running toward something. The next morning, Our flight left at 6:15 a.m. Noah pressed her face to the window as Dallas shrank beneath us. Mommy, will Daddy call? I don't know, baby. That's okay, she said, still looking out the window. He only ever yelled when he called for us anyway. My chest tightened. She was 8 years old, and she already understood what had taken me a decade to admit. We landed at JFK just before noon. Catherine had arranged a furnished apartment for us in Brooklyn. 2 bedrooms, a small kitchen, a view of a brick wall, and it was the most beautiful place I'd ever seen because it was ours. By 2 p.m., Noah was set up with Mrs. Peralta, the retired teacher next door, whom Catherine had personally vetted as a part-time nanny. By 3 p.m., I was sitting across from Catherine at her office in Midtown, and she was sliding a thick manila folder across her desk. I'm glad you're finally here, she said, because I need you on something big. The folder contained 18 months of financial records from a real estate development firm in Dallas. The company was called Ridgeline Partners. Their CEO suspected that someone in upper management was inflating construction invoices through a network of fake subcontractor companies, skimming millions off the top. The numbers didn't add up, and the board wanted answers before their next SEC filing. Marin, I know this is your first day, but I specifically waited for you on this one. Why? Catherine folded her hands. Because the person we believe is behind the fraud is a senior project manager named Derek Calloway. The room went very quiet. My ex-husband, I said. Your ex-husband. I stared at the folder. Part of me wanted to push it back across the desk. Part of me wanted to laugh. And a very small, cold part of me wanted to open it and find every last cent he'd stolen. I opened the folder. Here's what I found in the first 48 hours. Derek had been creating phantom subcontractor invoices for at least 2 years. The companies had names that sounded real. Summit Concrete Solutions, Apex Drywall LLC, Meridian Plumbing Group. But none of them had employees, offices, or tax returns. They were just bank accounts. And every dollar that flowed into those accounts eventually landed in a single private account held by a man named Victor Desmond. Victor Desmond. I ran the name through every database I had access to. He was 61 years old, had been investigated twice by the FBI for wire fraud, and had never been convicted because he always used someone else as the front man. Someone expendable. Someone vain and easily manipulated. Someone exactly like Derek. And then I found something that made my hands go cold. Tessa, Derek's pregnant mistress, the woman carrying what Judith had already started calling the family heir, had received 17 wire transfers from Victor Desmond's accounts over the past 14 months. Her real name wasn't even Tessa Brooks. It was Natasha Kern. She had 2 prior fraud convictions in Florida and a bench warrant in Georgia. I sat back in my chair and looked at the ceiling for a long time. Derek hadn't found a younger, prettier replacement for me. He'd been targeted. Tessa was Victor's partner, possibly his girlfriend, and they'd planted her in Derek's path to get access to the construction budgets he managed. The pregnancy was the hook. It guaranteed that Derek would leave me, tie himself to Tessa, and keep the money flowing without asking questions. Catherine, I said, I need a forensic obstetrician's invoice. Check if Tessa, real name Natasha Kern, has any medical billing under Desmond's insurance. 2 hours later, Catherine's investigator came back with the answer. Natasha Kern had visited an OB/GYN clinic in Plano, Texas, 4 months ago. The insurance claim was filed under Victor Desmond's policy, listing him as her domestic partner. 4 months ago. That was a full month before she supposedly met Derek. The baby, if there even was a baby, was not my ex-husband's. I started typing the report. While I was working 18-hour days in New York, things were unraveling fast back in Dallas. Derek, giddy with his new freedom, had moved Tessa into the house within a week of my leaving. Judith was over every day, redecorating Noah's old bedroom into a nursery. They'd picked out blue wallpaper with sailboats. Paige, Derek's younger sister, had already thrown a baby shower, Instagram stories, gift registries, the whole thing. And then the call came. Derek's boss, the CFO of Ridgeline Partners, summoned him to a meeting on a Tuesday morning. When Derek walked into the conference room expecting a routine project review, he found 3 auditors, 2 attorneys, and a stack of printouts 6 inches thick. Sit down, Calloway. What is this? This is every fake invoice you've submitted over the past 26 months. Summit Concrete, Apex Drywall, Meridian Plumbing. None of these companies exist. The money, $4.2 million, was funneled into accounts controlled by a man named Victor Desmond. Would you like to explain? Derek apparently went white, then red. Then he started shouting that it was a mistake, that he'd been set up, that someone must have forged his authorization codes. The head auditor wasn't impressed. Mr. Calloway, every single invoice bears your digital signature, submitted from your company laptop, routed through your project budgets. We also have email correspondence between you and the account holder. Who put this together? Derek stammered. That's confidential. The investigation was conducted by an outside forensic team retained by the board. What Derek didn't know, what he wouldn't find out until much later, was that the outside forensic team was me. Meanwhile, Tessa was having her own bad day. Judith, playing the role of doting future grandmother, had insisted on accompanying Tessa to her next prenatal appointment. She'd even dragged Paige along, the whole family showing up to see the ultrasound of their precious heir. The ultrasound went fine. Healthy baby, strong heartbeat. But the doctor, reading from the chart, mentioned something that made Judith's smile freeze. Everything looks great. 22 weeks along, right on track. 22 weeks. That was 5.5 months pregnant. Derek and Tessa had been together for 4 months. Judith could do basic math. I'm sorry, Judith said slowly. Did you say 22 weeks? Yes, ma'am. Due date is early November. Judith turned to Tessa. I wasn't there, but Paige told me later that the look on Judith's face could have peeled paint off a wall. Tessa, my sons met you at the end of February. It's now late June. That's 4 months. How are you 5.5 months pregnant? Tessa started stammering about irregular cycles, about how dates can be off, about how ultrasound measurements aren't always exact. But the doctor, without breaking any rules, simply confirmed what the chart said. The gestational age was consistent across multiple measurements. There was no ambiguity. Paige told me Judith didn't say another word. She stood up, walked out of the examination room, and sat in the waiting area staring at the wall for 20 minutes. When Tessa came out, mascara streaked down her face, Judith looked up and said one sentence. Get out of my son's house by tonight. Things moved fast after that. The audit at Ridgeline triggered a criminal referral to the Dallas County DA's office. Derek was arrested at the house on a Thursday evening. Paige happened to be there picking up some of Judith's things and watched 2 detectives walk him out in handcuffs. Victor Desmond, tipped off by the sudden silence from Derek's accounts, tried to liquidate his offshore holdings and disappear. He made it as far as the Cancun airport before being detained by Mexican federal police acting on an Interpol red notice that Catherine's firm had helped initiate. His assets, every account, every shell company, every crypto wallet, were frozen under a federal seizure order. And Tessa, Natasha, whatever her real name was. She showed up at the house one last time, soaking wet from a rainstorm, begging Judith to let her in. Judith, who 1 month earlier had been cupping this woman's face and calling her sweetheart, wouldn't even open the door. I don't know you, Judith said through the glass. And I don't know whose baby that is, but it's not my grandchild. The last anyone heard, Tessa had skipped town. There was a warrant out for her in connection with the Desmond fraud ring, but she hadn't been found. She just vanished, the way peoples like her always do when the money dries up. 6 weeks after leaving Dallas, I flew back for a meeting I never imagined I'd be having. Ridgeline Partners, reeling from the embezzlement scandal, had been acquired by a larger development group, one that Catherine's fund held a controlling interest in. As part of the restructuring, they needed a new chief financial officer, someone who understood the company's books inside and out, someone who had literally traced every dollar. Catherine called me into her office and closed the door. Marin, I want you to take the CFO position at Ridgeline. You're joking. I'm not. You know their financials better than anyone alive. The board has already approved it. The question is whether you want it. I thought about it for exactly 4 seconds. Yes. So when I walked into the Ridgeline Partners conference room in downtown Dallas for the transition meeting, I was not the woman who'd left that city 6 weeks earlier in a used Honda with one suitcase. I was the new CFO, the person who would be overseeing the repayment of every dollar Derek had stolen. Derek wasn't there. He was in county jail awaiting trial, unable to make the $500,000 bail. But his family was. The company's attorneys had summoned Arthur, Glenn, Derek's father, along with Judith and Paige, because they'd co-signed several of the fraudulent loan guarantees Derek had used to prop up his fake subcontractors. They were jointly liable. The total damages the company was pursuing came to $6.8 million, including penalties and interest. When I walked through those conference room doors, Judith was mid-sentence, lecturing one of the junior attorneys about how her family shouldn't be held responsible for her son's mistakes. This is outrageous. We had nothing to do with Derek's business. We just signed a few papers because he asked us to. We're the victims here. She stopped talking when she saw me. I watched the recognition hit her face in stages. First confusion. What is she doing here? Then disbelief. It can't be. Then something I'd never seen from Judith in 12 years of marriage. Fear. Hello, Judith. Marin, what? Why are you? The lead attorney stepped forward. Mrs. Calloway, I'd like to introduce you to Marin Aldridge, the new chief financial officer of Ridgeline Partners. Ms. Aldridge led the forensic investigation that uncovered your son's embezzlement. She will be overseeing all recovery efforts related to the $6.8 million in damages. Judith gripped the edge of the conference table. Paige, sitting next to her, whispered, "Mom, Mom, sit down." Glenn just stared at me. Unlike Judith, Glenn had always been quiet, just quiet. The kind of man who watched his wife tear other people apart and said nothing. He looked 10 years older than when I'd last seen him. I sat down at the head of the table. I didn't rush. I didn't gloat. I opened my folder and laid out the facts the way I'd lay them out for any other case. The total damages assessed against the Calloway family are $6.8 million. This includes the $4.2 million Derek embezzled, $1.9 million in penalties, and $700,000 in legal and investigative costs. Because you co-signed the loan guarantees, you are jointly and severally liable. Under Texas law, debts arising from fraud are non-dischargeable in bankruptcy. This obligation will not go away. Judith's mouth was opening and closing, but no sound was coming out. The family home on Oakmont Drive has been appraised and will be liquidated. Derek's 401k, his brokerage accounts, his vehicles, all subject to seizure. Glenn, your pension will be garnished at the maximum rate allowed by law. You can't do this, Paige said, her voice cracking. You're doing this because you're angry. This is revenge. I looked at her. Paige, 6 weeks ago, you told me I'd be sleeping in my car. You threw a baby shower for a woman who was defrauding your brother. You posted Instagram stories from a nursery you decorated in my daughter's bedroom. I paused. This isn't revenge. This is accounting. The room was silent. Judith had started crying, ugly heaving sobs that shook her whole body. Glenn sat perfectly still, tears running down his face without a sound. Part of me, a part I'm not proud of, felt satisfied. But mostly I just felt tired. Tired of these people. Tired of how small they'd made me feel. Tired of pretending their opinion of me ever mattered. I stood up. My attorneys will be in touch regarding the payment schedule. If you have questions, direct them to this office. I walked to the door, then stopped. One more thing. Derek hasn't asked about Noah. Not once, in 6 weeks. No call, no letter, no message through his lawyer. I didn't turn around. I thought you should know that. I heard Judith make a sound behind me, something between a gasp and a moan. I didn't look back. I flew home to New York that evening. When I got to the apartment, Noah was at the kitchen table doing homework with Mrs. Peralta. The second she saw me, she jumped out of her chair and threw her arms around my waist. "Mommy, I learned cursive today." Look, she dragged me to the table and showed me a worksheet covered in wobbly, looping letters. Her name over and over. Noah, Noah. Each one a little steadier than the last. "That's beautiful, baby. Mrs. Peralta says I have good handwriting for a lefty, and I made a friend named Simone. She has a hamster named Gerald." I laughed. I hadn't laughed in weeks. Real, full-body laughter that made my ribs ache. "Gerald the hamster? He's orange. Can we get a hamster?" "We'll talk about it." Later that night, after Noah was asleep, I sat on the fire escape with a cup of tea and looked out at the Brooklyn skyline. Somewhere in Dallas, Derek was lying on a cot in county jail. Judith and Glenn were sitting in a house they were about to lose. Paige was probably scrolling through job listings for the first time in her life. And Tessa, Natasha, was hiding from a federal warrant with a baby on the way that belonged to a con man who'd been arrested in Mexico. All of them had been so sure, so absolutely certain that I was the weak one, the useless one, the woman with no skills and no future. Judith had said it to my face on my wedding day. "You're lucky my son chose you. What would you even do without him?" I took a sip of my tea. The city hummed below me. Millions of people living their lives in those glowing windows. I'd tell you what I did without him. I raised a brilliant daughter. I built a career in secret that most people couldn't build in the open. I uncovered a multi-million-dollar fraud and brought down a criminal network. And I did it all while making dinner every night, driving carpool every morning, and being told constantly that I was nothing. Months later, things settled. Not into a fairy tale. Life isn't that neat. But into something real and steady. Derek was convicted on 12 counts of wire fraud and embezzlement. His sentence was 7 years. At his sentencing, he made a statement about how he'd been manipulated. How the pressure of providing for a family had driven him to desperate measures. He didn't mention that the family he claimed to be providing for had been secretly supporting him. He didn't mention that the offshore account I'd maintained had been quietly covering the gap between his actual salary and the lifestyle Judith demanded. None of them ever knew. And now it didn't matter. Glenn and Judith moved into a one-bedroom apartment in a part of Dallas they used to drive through with their windows up. Judith got a job as a cashier at a home improvement store. According to Paige, who texted me once, awkwardly, to apologize, Judith cried every shift for the first month. Then she stopped crying and just went quiet. Paige herself was working as an administrative assistant and taking night classes. She was the only one who'd ever said she was sorry, and I believed her because she didn't ask me for anything when she said it. I didn't respond to the text. I wasn't angry anymore. I just didn't have anything to say to her. Victor Desmond pleaded guilty to 23 counts of fraud and was sentenced to 15 years. His assets, once frozen, were liquidated and distributed among his victims. Ridgeline Partners recovered almost all of the stolen funds. And Derek, in all those months, through the arrest, the trial, the sentencing, never once asked about Noah. His attorney reached out to mine about visitation rights during the custody finalization, and I braced myself for a fight. But it turned out Derek's attorney was just going through the motions. When the judge asked Derek directly if he wished to maintain parental rights, he said, and I quote, "I don't think that's in anyone's best interest right now." Not in anyone's best interest. His own daughter. He couldn't even say her name in court. I didn't tell Noah what he said. She'd figure out who her father was in her own time, and I'd be there when she did. On a Saturday morning in October, Noah and I walked through Central Park. The leaves were turning, that impossible New York autumn where every tree looks like it's on fire. She was wearing the purple jacket she'd picked out herself and carrying a bag of stale bread for the ducks. "Mommy?" "Yeah, baby." "Do you ever miss the old house?" I thought about it. The house on Oakmont Drive with the big kitchen where I used to cook meals nobody thanked me for. The living room where Derek would sit on his phone while I read Noah bedtime stories. The bedroom where I'd lie awake at 2 a.m. working on fraud cases while my husband slept, thinking I was scrolling Pinterest. "No," I said. "I don't." "Me neither." She tore off a piece of bread and threw it toward a group of ducks. "This is better. This is better," I agreed. We watched the ducks fight over the bread. A jogger ran past. An old man on a bench was reading a newspaper, and 2 kids were trying to climb a rock that was barely 3 feet tall like it was Everest. "Mom? Can we still get a hamster?" I squeezed her hand and we kept walking. The skyline rose behind the trees, sharp and bright against the autumn sky. And I thought about something I wished I could tell every woman who's ever been made to feel small by the people who were supposed to love her. You are not what they called you. You never were. The bread bag was empty. Noah swung it around in circles, laughing at nothing the way only kids can. I watched her and felt something I hadn't felt in 12 years. Not relief. Not victory. Just peace. We walked home through the golden light and I didn't look back.